If you didn't know the story of what truly happened to her, you could just assume, it was an accident, a car crash, whatever. They don't say, that she was violently slain by another member. I just feel like they kind of whitewashed over that. But also, I feel like this is a perfect example of how they take your grief and sort of hijack it. Like they use it, kind of like you said, they weaponize it, and they use it to make people double down on their commitment to the organization. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Difficult Childhood. My name is Falon, and as always, I'm joined by my lifelong childhood best friend, Jason, and
Hey there.
also my amazing co-host. This week, we kind of mentioned at the end of our last episode that we were going to be diving back into a more serious subject this week, which we are. It's one that we take really seriously. We've done a lot of research. Jason really dug deep on this subject, and I'm going to let him just kind of start our conversation off today.
Yeah, okay. Well, today we want to take apart an incident that happened here in Oregon, not too far from where I live, actually, when one Jehovah's Witness actually murdered another JW. And they were both active. Nobody was disfellowshipped. Nothing. They were both active Jehovah's Witnesses in the same congregation. And it really shook people, obviously, of course. I mean, that's going to happen. But we were kind of doing some analysis. We're definitely doing some analysis of this incident. And we were able to determine that some false claims made by the governing body, the organization's leadership, actually really directly played a pretty major part in why this young woman ended up being assaulted and killed. So we're going to talk about that and unpack it a bit. But first, I'm going to show a clip of what actually happened. This is national news at the time. I think this is ABC News here. We'll go ahead and play a clip.
Very sad story out of Portland. The neighbor arrested for killing 21-year-old Whitney Heichel is going to face a judge today, and ABC's Abby Boudreau brings us this exclusive interview with her grieving husband. Good morning, Abby.
Good morning, George. Gresham police say Whitney Heichel actually knew the man accused of killing her, and now her husband wants some answers. As Whitney Heichel's husband, Clint, grieves. This morning, his neighbor and acquaintance, Jonathan Daniel Holt, sits 20 miles away in a jail cell, awaiting arraignment on murder charges later today. Police say Holt abducted and killed the 21-year-old Starbucks barista on her way to work Tuesday morning in Portland, Oregon, before dumping Whitney's body on this wooded mountain.
It's very difficult. We only had a year and 9 months together, and when you get married, you bet on forever, you know.
In an exclusive interview with ABC News overnight, Clint Heichel said the suspect, who's also married, lived in his apartment complex and attended Heichel's church. He says he and Whitney took care of the Holt's plants and cats when they were away. He says he even helped Jonathan Holt jumpstart his motorcycle 2 weeks ago, an attempt to be friendly, just like his wife.
She was very kind, just loved everybody. She didn't do anything to deserve this. And just why? That's the only question, is why.
Police still say they don't know that answer either, and have released few details about when Holt approached Whitney or if he'd been stalking her. Former neighbors like Vincent Wilson are just as confused.
Some snap.
So it goes on to talk more about the information they had at the time, but what came out afterward. And you can certainly, if anyone's watching this, you can look at YouTube at the clips that they have. There's lots of news clips about this.
Right.
They really do fill you in what happened, and we'll cover a little bit more. But basically, Whitney was the next door neighbor, a couple doors down anyway, in the same apartment complex, and she was on her way to go to Starbucks, where she works. She's a barista. Like many Jehovah's Witnesses, just kind of doing an entry-level job just to make ends meet. And she was due there at 7 a.m., didn't show up. Coworkers got concerned. And the whole thing turned out that Jonathan Holt, a Jehovah's Witness, active Jehovah's Witness in their congregation, for whom they took care of plants and cat when they were out of town stuff, he asked for a ride. And then they were going to ride to the Starbucks. And when they were on their way, he pulled a gun on her and assaulted her, had her drive out to the middle of nowhere, Larch Mountain. So it was super remote. And I guess the point is that Whitney accepted that, they went ahead and let him ride in her SUV because there was an expectation of safety.
Right.
We're kind of talking about where that expectation of safety comes from and why she would have felt that, even though maybe a little bit odd, it was okay to give her, somebody in her own congregation a ride.
Right. But in a
21
few
years old.
minutes, we're also going to talk about why it's important to mention that they were both active, especially the perpetrator in this case, that he was an active, non-disciplined, non-marked individual in the congregation, because that does make a difference. But we'll
Huge
discuss that later on.
Yeah, absolutely. And to kind of discuss what we are talking about with the leadership of the organization of Jehovah's Witnesses, what expectation they have set, we went ahead and I looked. First of all, I want to say that I spent about 20 minutes finding talks on the Watchtower's website, on JW's website, about the spiritual paradise, they call it, that special group. There's this, the world is bad, Jehovah's Witnesses are good. And we are not one of these channels. And of course, it's perfectly great. We love the rebuttal channels, are very interesting. That's not what we do here, partially because I can't stand watching those videos to do a rebuttal. I don't know. I know we've talked about, you felt the same way.
It burns you out quick.
Oh, they're hard to watch. And that Jehovah cadence that they use. Literally, these clips I'm going to show you, I promise for the full episode, this is under 3 minutes of these clips, partly because I've increased the speed by about 40%, just so you can track what they're talking about. It's being so slow. But here's the first one. And this is by a guy named Ron Curzon.
Robot Ron.
Yeah, as Lloyd calls him. Let's see. He's a helper, I believe, to the governing body. And this is just a 31-second clip. Let's see what he says.
How good and how pleasant it is for brothers to dwell together in unity. So we are so privileged and proud to be part of this organization. Jehovah has drawn each one of us to be part of this unified organization. So what is it that makes Jehovah's organization, our organization, so different, so special? We worship Jehovah. God is love. His son Jesus perfectly represented him, mirrored every aspect of him with love. And Jesus said that his disciples would be identified with love.
He cuts off a little bit there. I cut him off a little soon by accident, but I had to trim it down. He went on for about 13 minutes, but that was the upshot, is that God loves Jesus. Jesus reflects that love to his followers, his organization, and that way that you can tell who the true organization are and who the people are that Jehovah's endorsing is that they have love among each other.
Right. They're starting to paint a theme of uniqueness, that this organization is totally unique from all other religious organizations. So that's like the theme that they're building layer by layer. Right.
And this is from the 2022 convention. So I know I did cut that a lot. So if you want to just, reconfirm that is the topic, he does, it's about 12 or 15 minutes of him talking, but that's basically what he says. So it's the 2022 regional convention that you can get that from. But then there's another clip here, and this is Leonard Myers, and let's see what Leonard has to say.
As we continue our consideration of the promises of peace in Isaiah's prophecies, I'd like you to imagine an Israelite living in Babylon. Now, he's just learned that Jews can return to Jerusalem and help to rebuild the temple. So he must decide if he and his family will leave Babylon to make the long trip to his homeland. What might he consider? Well, after 70 years, the land must have changed. Wolves, leopards, lions, and bears must freely walk in the fields. Snakes make their home there. So he might ask himself, will my domestic animals be killed by predators? Will my small children be bitten by snakes? And what about the danger of fierce men attacking us on the journey home? Well, any such fears could be dispelled by considering the prophecy at Isaiah chapter 11, verses 6 through 9. Let's read that together. And notice this promise of peace, starting in verse 6. The wolf will reside for a while with the lamb, and with the young goat, the leopard will lie down, and a little boy will lead them. Faithful ones would have nothing to fear from animal or human predators. Do we see this prophecy being fulfilled in our day? Not with the literal animals, but we do see a spiritual fulfillment. In our day, the knowledge of Jehovah helps people who are violent to transform their personality and become peaceable. In harmony with Colossians chapter 3, verse 10, these ones have clothed themselves with a new personality. They've stripped off animalistic, violent tendencies and transform their lives in harmony with what the Bible teaches. As you watch the following video, notice the peace we enjoy with fellow believers now, and just imagine the peace that we'll enjoy in paradise.
How would you feel during a long journey where you might meet wild animals and criminals along the road? Jehovah assured the returning exiles that they would return in safety and dwell in peace. In the spiritual paradise we enjoy right now, people who were once violent have learned to be humble, loving, and peaceable.
So what are your thoughts on that video we just watched there, Falon?
Well, the first thing that crossed my mind when he's talking about the parallels between ancient commuters to the city and modern day Christians, even though he does mention, what the pilgrimage back to Jerusalem, they were afraid that they could potentially be beset by robbers or criminals. And he says, well, today I don't have to worry about the wildlife, but we can enjoy basically this bubble of safety from violent criminals, because once you join the organization, which is God's only organization, that all that's just washed away and changed. So basically they're just creating this mindset that once you're in the organization, all that lifestyle is just washed away. Now, do I think God can change a person? Yes. But just because you join the Jehovah's Witness organization doesn't mean that part of your personality doesn't exist anymore. And it's not fair to give people a false sense of security that everyone on the inside is safe, because that's when people let their guard down, just like Whitney did with someone that I'm sure she thought, well, he's a member just like I'm a member. It says that they were acquaintances in the news story. It doesn't say they were close friends or anything. So I'm sure the only thing that crossed her mind was, well, we go to the Kingdom Hall together. I'm sure it's fine, to give him a ride. And of course, that kicked off the events that led to the end of her life.
Yeah. And another point that I think was important that they completely glossed over was that, of course, if you say to one of Jehovah's Witnesses who's indoctrinated about this story, what happened, they would, and then tell them about, well, what's this expectation of a spiritual paradise where all the brothers are loving? Well, they would, I think, in fact, when I was one of Jehovah's Witnesses, would have given the argument back, well, this is a spiritual paradise, and there are still imperfect people. Bad things can still happen. You need to watch out, and you shouldn't have an expectation of absolute security within the congregation. I think that's the disclaimer. However, you notice in this talk, and in fact, if you go back and watch Meyer's entire talk, it never once does he paint it that way. And many times, and including the part that we showed, was that you see someone who went from very violent, shaving their face, and then coming back very, very trustworthy. Now they're in the organization. They had all these shots of brothers and sisters hugging each other. This is a safe place, is what that says. There's no other explanation. They're saying that the organization is a safe place.
Well, and that basically is the theme of the governing body in general. They say we're not inspired, we're not infallible, but also put your complete trust in what we say. Trust us literally with your lives. So yes. It's kind of the same echo in what you're saying. Like, yes, we're a human organization filled with imperfect people, but also you're in the bubble. This is a safe place. And it just perpetuates that narrative that it's us against them. It's them against the world. And like I said earlier, the reason that we made a specific note that her perpetrator, her killer, was a member in good standing is because had he not been in good standing, had he been someone who was, recently disfellowshipped, recently reinstated, someone who had been reproved or anything like that,
right,
the congregation would be quick to say, well, he obviously was already troubled because, he wasn't in good standing with Jehovah. There was clearly issues going on already. He was being influenced by the world, et cetera, et cetera. But that wasn't the case. He was, a full-fledged member, to our knowledge, not in any kind of, judicial hot water. So there, from a congregation standpoint, there would have been not really anything to give her qualm about offering him a ride.
Agreed. And when this happened, I remember everybody being shocked because I didn't know them, any of them in their congregation myself, but I knew people who knew them.
Right.
My business partner and I, he knew both of them, and he commented at the time that it was shocking because the guy was in good. It wasn't. It was just like, what? Why would she expect him after he gets into her Ford to pull a gun? That's insane. Why would you expect that? But you certainly could have expected that if it was just a random neighbor. You didn't have that expectation of safety. And for the governing body to claim that their organization is special, like they did multiple times in those videos, it is negligent because it does create that expectation. In my opinion, the organization should have been absolutely sued over this. And I know the governing body doesn't want JWs out murdering each other. I know they didn't say, hey, Holt, go murder her. Sure. I know that. But they created this environment that made it so that she felt safe to go ahead and give him a 5-minute ride. It was literally 5 minutes away from their apartment.
Her job,
close, yeah. Her Starbucks where she worked.
Well, and as our discussion is gonna show, what happened before her killing is only 50% of this traumatic story. If you can imagine, it gets worse as it goes on. We'll get to that in a minute.
Yeah, we will. And let me, in the meanwhile, maybe share another one of these news clips here. This is from the local news, and we'll share kind of how this went down and what happened with the arraignment and such.
The man accused of killing 21-year-old Whitney Heichel pleaded guilty today. Her death caused a lot of outrage across the Portland area. She lived in the same Gresham apartment complex as Holt. They went to the same church, and she had agreed to give him a ride one day last fall, and that's when he betrayed her trust. Lisa Balick is live in Clackamas County now with more on this very emotional day in court for Heichel's family and friends. So, Lisa, what was their reaction?
They said afterwards that they believe it was the right sentence. They really did not want to go through the pain and anguish of reliving everything that happened to their daughter, to their wife, to their sister, again here in court. Now, Jonathan Holt avoided the death penalty by pleading guilty to the charges. 25-year-old Jonathan Holt was here in the courtroom today when he was sentenced. He admitted kidnapping, sexually assaulting, and murdering Whitney Heichel. She and her husband lived in the same Gresham apartment complex. Police found her body on Larch Mountain last fall after Holt told detectives he had asked her for a ride, then assaulted and shot her. In court, Whitney's family members, including her husband, told Holt they don't think much of him. Then Holt apologized.
I want to say that I'm sorry. The sister.
You go ahead and skip this. I don't really hear his apology.
Forgive him. Now, Clint Heichel, Whitney's husband, looked him in the eyes and said, what do you tell somebody who did something like this? But he did say that he and the family members, all devout Jehovah Witnesses, will see her again. But he said to Mr. Holt, you will not. Live in Oregon City, Lisa Balick, KOIN 6 News.
It's interesting. So what happened next that you referenced, Falon, was that this was 2 weeks after this news report, after he was arraigned and sentenced. But within 2 weeks, we had a district convention in Portland, and Rebecca and I were sitting there at this convention, and what we heard from the platform, it actually seemed, in fully indoctrinated Jehovah's Witnesses at the time, it seemed incredibly in bad taste, and it seemed abusive. And so I'll play what happened here. This is Whitney's mother. And we went ahead and adjusted the video because I don't think she necessarily wants to have her face on our channel. I just went ahead and took an image from that day of the audience at the convention and her interview from the platform. And we'll chat about this after. So
We'd like to introduce to you now Sister Laura Lee from the Columbia River Gorge congregation. Now, Sister recently lost her daughter in a tragic death. Let's see how Jehovah helps her. What reassurance from Jehovah has helped you to cope with your loss?
Just knowing that Whitney will live and love and share life again, it's just like a jump start to my heart every single day. And the certainty of that truth, that hope, just helps me make sure that no matter how deep this hurt reaches inside me, that I will never let it bury my faith or allow me to surrender to inactivity.
Very good. How has Jehovah helped you, though?
Whitney will ask me that one day, and I'll tell my daughter how every week when her memory keeper invited me to sit in his house, in his congregation, where I could be built up and encouraged and strengthened by him, that I never willingly forfeited my seat there. I'll tell her how he kept me busy in the ministry of his son and how in other volunteer projects. And because I was there, I was with his people, with this incomparably beautiful brother and sisterhood. And it was their arms and their strength, their tremendous courage and resilient faith that just braced me up and kept me standing on my feet with my eyes looking forward. And I can't wait to tell her that, and that if I was ever with my knees bent or my head bowed, it was only because I was praying to our God. I want to tell her that rather than wait in helpless despair for the new world to come to me, that every morning I stepped into a spiritual routine with our families and with the truest of friends. We walked toward it, and we walked toward her. And she will say to me, with her radiant joy, "Oh, Mama, Jehovah took such good care of us, and look, we're all here and we have forever."
That's beautiful. Why are you so confident that these promises will happen?
Because we worship and we belong to Jehovah, the God of the heavens and the universe, and he has spoken it. He says that in just a little while longer, he will compensate us for every sorrow and every injustice, every hurt that we've ever faithfully endured in ways beyond anything that we could possibly ever imagine, where we will live and we will love life with those we mourn and miss rather than suffer and endure it without them. And while this mother's heart just beats for the day when Jehovah fills these aching arms, when he gives his son, our King, the authority to call out, "Whitney, wake up." I will wait as patiently as I can, but always trusting him to be the keeper of promises that he's proven himself to be. Our beautiful Whitney and so many we love have beat us to paradise, but I am absolutely convinced that we're not very far behind them.
What are your thoughts on that, Falon?
Well, obviously, just to hear the pain in her voice is like, gets me choked up. But a couple of things stood out to me. When the brother is doing the intro before he actually lets her start to speak, he introduces her, he calls her by name, and he says she recently lost her daughter in, and there's like a slight pause. It's almost like he wanted to say in an accident, but he didn't. He said in a horrible death. You didn't know the story of what truly happened to her. You could just assume, it was an accident, a car crash, whatever. They don't say, that she was violently slain by another member. I just feel like they kind of whitewashed over that. Damage control. But also I feel like this is a perfect example of how they take your grief and sort of hijack it. Like they use it, kind of like you said, they weaponize it, and they use it to make people double down on their commitment to the organization. This woman is pouring out her heart. She's talking about, the worst thing that's ever happened to her in her entire life. And it was so fresh. This was just weeks after her daughter's killer was sentenced. So the wound is as open as it ever was. And she's going, and she talked for a while. I mean, we played it a little quicker, but I mean, she gave a long interview. So she's up on stage, thousands of people looking at her, uh, replaying this scenario of how she feels like, the organization helps her go on, like the worst moment in her whole life. And it just seems so scripted. I mean, not that her pain didn't feel real, but the fact that she was holding it in long enough to get through this, rehearsed, I mean, I want to say speech. I don't want to say speech, but I mean, basically a rehearsed speech. I just can't imagine saying, like, during rehearsal saying, yeah, this feels right. It's just, to me, it just seems so inappropriate. And the fact that they're using that to indoctrinate other people that are listening, saying, see, her daughter was killed, even though they didn't say killed. Her daughter died this horrible death, but look how committed she is. She knows that's the only way to deal with her grief or to see her child again. You just got to stay on the inside. That's just disgusting to me.
Tighten the control. Yeah, agreed. And by the way, I want to go back. I'm not trying to correct you here. This is something that is interesting because it does sound like I sped that up. I didn't.
Oh, really? Wow.
Rushing to get through it.
She was
crumbles.
cooking, getting through all that. Wow.
I believe, I don't know for sure, but I'm pretty sure that guy mispronounced her name on top of all of it. That is just so horrific. And I think this is another time where the organization should have been sued for doing this. The abuse to make, or even to, I'm sure they're like, well, you have a story to share, and if you're brave enough to share it, it'll help others. There's that manipulation that's not something I know, I'm guessing, but I'm very confident that's how it went. And then they trot her out in front of 5,000 people and make her talk about that, like you said, the worst thing that's happened to her. Her daughter's 21 years old. I see a 21-year-old now. They seem like they're about 12 to me because I'm in my 40s and I'm just like, oh, you're so young. I think that's why, even though she wasn't a child, part of it we're talking about on our podcast, difficult childhood. Her brain wasn't even fully developed when she was murdered. And also another point I think you made that I really agree with is that the grieving process. She said something. She said, if there was ever a time that my head was, my knees were down or my head was turned downward, I'm going to tell her that it was just because I was praying because I'm so excited to see her. You're not allowed to be sad in the organization. You set those feelings on the shelf. You never deal with them, and it's horrifyingly unhealthy for you. And then it leads to putting feelings like that on the shelf or just pushing them down are known to lead to substance abuse, other mental health problems. It's
physical health problems.
Horribly. Yeah, it's horrible for you. But the organization does that. And I saw this firsthand. I know I've harped on this a bit when I was at the hospice care for my aunt a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago now. I saw my mother and my sister, both and my other brother. They're just talking all cheery like, and I was actually having a conversation with her. And then meanwhile, my aunt's other relatives that were not Jehovah's Witnesses were having real conversations with her and getting to say goodbye in a real meaningful way. But the JWs, no, they were all just
autopilot,
floating into this. Well, it's going to be a real bummer not to see you for a few years, which I don't, obviously, as you can tell from my screen thing, I don't believe that any of that's the case. But I don't think that all religions hijack the grieving process like Jehovah's Witnesses do.
Jehovah's Witnesses, they're very strange about grief anyway. In 2015, when my younger brother passed away, of course, he was the baby of our family. It was really difficult. And we had a steady stream of people coming in, to console my parents, speak with us, just the traditional, mourning, whatever. But I was listening to one sister talk to me, but at the corner of the room, I could hear another brother speaking to my dad. I don't know the first half of their conversation, what the context was, but I heard him say to my dad, who's having the worst, just like this poor woman, the worst time of his life, his child's dead. I heard him say, it's important that we grieve appropriately with modesty.
Whoa.
Half of my brain wanted to just cut loose and just fly off the handle like, how dare you? How dare you say that to someone? Unless you're living it, you don't have a right to say how someone is grieving, whether it's appropriate or what's inappropriate grieving. But basically, he was saying like maintain the persona of someone that's grieving in a controlled manner, or someone that's not without hope. Basically, I didn't make a scene because my dad and mom were already so distraught. I didn't want to make it worse for them, and it would have. But when I tell you it took every ounce of my self-control to keep from really losing it, it did. So yeah, they're just very strange about that. But then also I think of the way that they train their members to view someone that's in the grieving process. When I was pioneering, there was lots of times maybe you just needed a few extra hours, not enough to even make a whole day of it. A lot of times they would say, if you're sick, maybe you can't go door to door and you just need like a few extra hours, that you could write letters. That was a common thing. So multiple brothers and sisters said, you open the newspaper, back when newspapers were common, open the newspaper and skim through the obituary column. Everyone in there, their families, hurting, missing their loved one. And a lot of times they would have home addresses printed in the obituary of places you could send flowers or condolences. And they would just commonly say, send them a brochure, write them a letter that says, would you like to see your loved one again? Would you like to see your child, your mom, your dad? Well, here's how. And then throw a pamphlet in there, because you get to count the time that you spend writing the letter, and you get to count the pamphlet that you put in the letter in your like placement category. And I think back on some of those letters that I wrote to people that I do not know, having the worst moment of their entire life, stillborn babies, parents died in car accident, horrible things. And even though at the time, like my intention was good, timing was so inappropriate. It makes me want to crawl out of my skin.
Yeah.
To think that I purposely chose them because they were in pain.
I get the motivation was, and this will help them. Not knowing.
Yeah. Join us is what I was basically saying.
Join us. Yeah, I remember seeing a few years ago on Reddit that some non-Jehovah's Witness hopped on the XJW subreddit and wrote a paragraph about just, they were furious. Like, I have just lost I don't remember what, loved one, and I get this trolling, to try to get me while I'm down. And they would never been a witness. They were just some random person who got that letter, and they were furious. So, I mean, I get it, but obviously, also, it wasn't, your mind's not your own back when you're in,
Sure. I try to, give myself some grace that, when you know better, you do better. But it's still just so uncomfortable to think about. And then also, they use those moments when you're at your lowest emotionally, even for the member who is still active, to just keep them hanging on. When my mom passed away just a couple of years ago, I was in the Kingdom Hall right after her funeral, and of course lots of people are coming up and giving me hugs, and I'm going to say 50 people, just for this argument, 50 people gave me a hug. And they all just said, we cared about her so much. She was a lovely person, whatever.
Yeah.
The last person came through the line, gave me a hug, and everybody knows there's a natural time for the hug to end. So when I went to let go, this person continued to hold on and whispered in my ear and said, I know you want to see her again. Come back to Jehovah, come back to the organization. I know she would want you to, that I know that would have been her wish, her one wish. If you want to see her again, don't stay away.
Gosh.
And I try not to be like a hot-headed person, but like when someone talks about my family in that way, it just makes my blood boil.
Oh,
and
God.
again, my dad was there. I couldn't really react the way I instinctually wanted to, but don't you dare try to take the worst moment of my life, or one of the worst moments of my life, and use it as leverage, to take my grief,
Right.
or take it and weaponize it against me and just try to drag me back in. It's just so offensive.
It really is. I think a lot of people get that who have left and perhaps not, had time to decompress all the indoctrination. That's still working on them a bit. Maybe they still feel guilty for leaving a bit, and then a loved one dies, and then you're pulled back in. Speaking of the preaching thing, and I have guilt about that too. I just feel bad for putting people through it. I actually got a message recently from some kid that I used to study with, and he was like, "I'm so glad you're doing this now," and neither of us fell for it. He was a sweet kid. I was like, "Oh,
Yeah.
buddy." But I wanted to mention that we were looking at the watch hours on this channel, and we have officially spent far more time anti-witnessing than we have witnessing collectively together. And I think collectively we have about 14 years worth of regular pioneering and a bunch of other years of just preaching. And that has been very helpful and very healing. So thanks guys for listening. Hopefully it was useful to you, but thanks guys for listening, and I appreciate that. But for just kind of a wrap it, for the governing body to actually make the claim that the organization is special, that it is a unique organization, a special, safe place, is clearly grossly negligent. Since they are demonstrably not special in any way, you can go back and look at our other episode about things that have happened to people who were preaching. And one of them was a murder that happened at a Kingdom Hall, in a Kingdom Hall parking lot. A pioneer sister, air quotes, got stabbed because she had been going out in service and developed a stalker. It's so insane. It's so clearly not a special place. The governing body's claims that it is a special, safe place are just so unbelievably negligent. And they just don't care about individual Jehovah's Witnesses' lives.
And it's a good warning that if you're on the inside, and maybe you're watching this video because you're having doubts or questions, until you're able to fully separate yourself, even if you're mentally out, physically in, keep your wits about you. Use common sense. Just because someone says that they're a Jehovah's Witness, and that doesn't mean that they're all good guys. There's plenty of good ones in there, kind people, but you have to keep your critical thinking engaged, even if it's just to the ends of self-preservation.
Right. And and that's so clearly, there's such a warning story of this story in particular. We won't go into it, but on other news stories, if you look them up on YouTube, you'll see what he was charged with. It is truly horrifying. She had a absolutely miserable last couple of hours of her life. And then you go on to the other episode we did about how many predators have flocked into the organization. And then we were talking with Chaka about how they try to indoctrinate prisoners. What are you guys doing? You're saying it's a safe place, and you're literally building it with this, non-reporting without two witnesses of CSA. You're building an organization to harbor harmful and dangerous, violent people.
Grew up in shadows, now I'm free. Dysfunction behind